My best friend stole my baby name. I shared that baby name with her years ago, the way you only share something when you think it's safe. We were young, laughing, dreaming out loud, and I never thought I'd have to protect it. She smiled, said she loved it, said it fit me perfectly. Then one day she used it. No warning, no permission. Everyone around me told me to let it go, told me it was just a name and not worth the fight. What they didn't know was that she'd crossed someone who doesn't forget moments like that, and the consequences didn't come fast or loud. They waited, they grew quietly, and when they finally showed up, they changed everything. I told her that baby name on a warm California night, the kind where the air feels soft and everything seems safe. We were sitting on the floor of my small West LA apartment, backs against the couch, sharing orange chicken straight out of the takeout box because neither of us felt like washing dishes. The windows were open. You could hear traffic in the distance and someone laughing on the sidewalk below. It was one of those nights where you feel like life is wide open and nothing bad could touch you. I said the name carefully, like it mattered. Like it was something you only say out loud when you trust the person listening. I even remember lowering my voice, almost joking, like the walls might hear me. I told her I'd had that name picked out for years, since college. Since before I even knew who I'd marry or where I'd end up. I told her why it mattered to me, where it came from, and how I'd carried it quietly like a promise to myself. She smiled when I said it, not a big smile. Not the kind you post online, just a small, knowing one. Then she laughed softly and said it was beautiful. She said it fit me. She said I'd be such a good mom one day. I remember feeling relieved, like I'd put something precious down and it was safe where it landed. I believed her. I really did. Years passed the way they always do, without asking permission. We got older, busier. Life filled in the space between our plans, but we stayed close. She was still my best friend. The person I called when something went wrong, and the first one I texted when something went right. We worked together, then didn't. We shared birthdays, holidays, breakups, and promotions. She got married first, a big vineyard wedding up north, the kind with fairy lights and handwritten vows. I stood next to her in a long dress, holding her bouquet while she cried happy tears. I clapped harder than anyone. I meant it. A couple years later, she told me she was pregnant. She called me crying, breathless, laughing and crying at the same time. I drove over with balloons and cupcakes, hugged her in the doorway, and felt genuinely happy for her. I helped plan the baby shower. I painted part of the nursery. I folded tiny clothes and joked about how unreal it all felt. At no point did I worry, not even a little, because why would I? She was my best friend. And some things, once shared, are supposed to be respected. The text came early on a Tuesday morning. Baby's here, followed by a heart emoji. I smiled at my phone before I even sat up in bed. I sent back congratulations, grabbed flowers from the corner store, and drove to the hospital. I remember feeling excited, replaying memories in my head, thinking about how I'd tell this story someday. How we'd laugh about it years later. How this was just another chapter. The hospital hallway smelled like sanitizer and something sweet I couldn't place. I followed the signs to maternity, my heels clicking too loud against the floor. I turned the corner and that's when I saw it. A bassinet near the window, a tiny bundle wrapped in white, and taped to the side, a small plastic card with the baby's name printed in bold letters. Her baby, my name. For a second my brain refused to process it. I stared at the card, convinced I was reading it wrong, convinced it had to be a coincidence, or maybe my eyes were tired. But it didn't change. The letters stayed the same. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like my body lagged behind my mind. I felt hot, then cold. I felt stupid for not seeing it coming. Claire noticed before I said anything. Her smile faltered for just a moment. Barely noticeable, but I caught it. She said my name softly, like she already knew what I was thinking, like she'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't confront her. I didn't make a scene. I hugged her. I congratulated her. I held the baby and smiled while everyone around me said the name out loud, over and over, like it was new, like it hadn't already lived somewhere else for years. I drove home afterward and threw up. Not from sickness, from shock, from realizing something had been taken from me in a way I couldn't undo. When I finally asked her about it days later, when I found the courage to say it out loud, she brushed it off like it was nothing. She said she didn't think it was that serious. She said names don't belong to anyone. She said I'd understand when I had my own kids. When I told other people, they sided with her. They told me to let it go. Told me it wasn't worth losing a friendship over. Told me it was just a name. And that's when something shifted inside me, because it wasn't just a name. It was the moment I realized she hadn't forgotten. She hadn't misunderstood. She hadn't accidentally crossed a line. She had decided I wouldn't do anything about it. And for the first time since I'd known her, she was wrong. After that day at the hospital, something between Claire and me changed, even though neither of us said it out loud. On the surface, everything stayed polite. We still texted, still liked each other's photos, still showed up to birthdays and holidays, but underneath it, there was a quiet distance that hadn't been there before. A thin crack that kept spreading every time I replayed the moment in my head. Every time I heard the name spoken casually, like it hadn't once belonged to someone else's future. I tried to do what everyone told me to do. I tried to let it go. I told myself that life was too short to hold on to something like this. I told myself I'd find another name someday, but every time I said it, my chest tightened. Because it wasn't about the name anymore, it was about the decision she made without me in the room, the way she smiled like nothing was wrong, the way she counted on my silence. Months passed, her baby grew, so did the comments. People would joke about how funny it was that I'd once mentioned loving that name. They'd laugh and say, "Guess she beat you to it." Claire never corrected them. She never once said, "That was hers first." She let the story shift in her favor, little by little, until it felt like I was the one rewriting history. That was when the first real twist happened, and it had nothing to do with babies. Claire's father passed away suddenly, a heart attack, no warning. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. I went to the funeral. I sat in the back and watched her cry into her husband's shoulder. I felt genuine sadness for her. I still cared, despite everything I always had. After the service, she pulled me aside. Her eyes were red, her voice shook. She told me her dad had always trusted me, that he'd once said I was the responsible one. She laughed through tears when she said it, like it was just a random memory. But it stuck with me, because I remembered him too. How he'd always asked about my job, how he'd told me I was smart with money, how he'd once joked that if Claire ever messed something up, I'd probably be the one fixing it. A few weeks later, she called me again. This time, her voice wasn't emotional, it was practical. She asked if I'd help her look over some documents, her dad's estate, trust papers, legal stuff she didn't understand. She said her lawyer suggested having someone neutral look things over, someone she trusted. I should have said no, that would have been the clean choice, but I didn't. I told myself I was just helping a friend, that this had nothing to do with the past, that I wasn't that kind of person, so I agreed. We met at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, papers spread everywhere, coffee going cold. She skimmed, I read, I asked questions, she waved most of them off. She trusted me to handle the details, she always had. That's when I noticed it. A clause buried deep in the trust, something small, almost forgettable. Her father had set aside a long-term inheritance for his grandchild, not immediate, not flashy, something that would mature years later, but it had conditions, very specific ones, conditions that required updates, confirmations, signatures over time. Claire didn't understand any of it, she admitted that. She said legal language made her head spin. She asked me to explain it to her in plain English. And I did, carefully, truthfully, but I also realized something she hadn't. She hadn't updated anything yet. The trust still listed placeholders, still needed formal confirmation, still relied on someone staying on top of it, and without that, it defaulted to a different structure, one that didn't disappear but didn't grow either. One that quietly stalled. I told her she should handle it soon. She nodded, said she would, then she didn't. Weeks turned into months. Life got busy, new baby, grief, exhaustion, she forgot. Or maybe she assumed I'd take care of it the way I always had. She never followed up, never asked, never checked, and I didn't remind her. That was the escalation, not a big move, not something dramatic, just silence, just letting time pass, letting deadlines slide, letting paperwork sit untouched. Everything stayed legal. Everything stayed clean, nothing illegal happened. Nothing could be undone easily either. Meanwhile, the distance between us grew. She became sharper with me, less kind. She snapped over small things, made comments that stung, joked about how sensitive I'd been over the name. Said motherhood changed her, said I wouldn't get it. I stopped showing up the same way. I pulled back, I watched, I listened. And slowly I stopped feeling guilty. Years passed again, her child grew older. The name became normal to everyone else. But every time I heard it, it still echoed. Still reminded me of that night on my apartment floor, when I'd trusted her with something fragile. One evening, out of nowhere, Claire called me furious. She'd finally met with a financial advisor. She'd finally looked closely, and she'd realized something was wrong. The inheritance wasn't what she thought it would be. The growth wasn't there. The projections were lower, much lower. She asked how that could have happened. I told her the truth, calmly. I told her about the clauses, the timelines, the updates that were never filed. I reminded her that I'd told her to handle it, that I'd explained it, that she'd said she would. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you remind me?" That was the moment everything came into focus. I told her, "I trusted you to remember." And for the first time since the hospital hallway, she understood exactly what it feels like when someone takes something from you quietly and expects you to swallow it. After that phone call, Claire didn't speak to me for months. No texts, no passive likes, no holiday check-ins. The silence was loud, and for the first time, it didn't make me anxious. It felt earned. Like the dust had finally settled enough for me to see the shape of everything clearly. I went on with my life the way people do when something breaks and you don't know how to fix it, so you stop touching it altogether. The turning point didn't come from Claire. It came from someone else, her mother. We ran into each other by accident at a grocery store in Pasadena. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked smaller, older, like grief had gently folded her inward. She smiled when she saw me and pulled me into a hug that lasted a little too long. The kind of hug that tells you someone has something heavy to say. We sat outside with coffees we didn't really drink. She talked about missing her husband, about how hard it was watching her daughters struggle, about how becoming a grandmother had changed everything for her. Then, very carefully, she brought up the inheritance. She said she didn't understand why it hadn't grown the way her husband planned. She said he'd talked about it often, said he wanted that money to mean something someday. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, she looked at me and asked a simple question. Did we mess something up? That was the moment I could have shifted blame, could have played confused, could have said it wasn't my place, but I didn't. I told her the truth, not emotionally, not defensively, just the facts, the timelines, the documents, the missed updates. I told her I'd explained it to Claire, that I'd trusted her to follow through. Her mother nodded slowly. She didn't accuse me, she didn't defend her daughter either. She just sighed and said something that stuck with me. She said, Claire's always assumed people will catch her when she falls. That was the ally I didn't expect. Not someone cheering me on, just someone who finally saw the pattern for what it was. A few weeks later, Claire showed up at my door unannounced. She looked tired, not angry this time, just worn down. She asked if we could talk. I let her in. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same one she'd leaned against years ago when I shared that name with her. She didn't start with the inheritance. She started with the baby name. She said she'd known it would hurt me. She admitted that. She said she told herself it didn't matter because I wasn't pregnant yet. That if she took it first, it would become hers by default. She said she thought I'd eventually forgive her because I always had before. That was the revelation. Not about the money, about the mindset. I asked her why she never apologized. Why did she never even acknowledge what she'd done? She looked at me and said something honest, finally. She said apologizing would have meant admitting she crossed a line. And once she did that, she couldn't pretend she was the good guy anymore. We talked for hours. Voices stayed calm, no screaming, no tears. Just truth, laid out like evidence neither of us could ignore. When she brought up the inheritance again, her voice cracked. She asked if I'd done it on purpose. I didn't dodge the question. I told her I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't forge signatures. I didn't lie. I just stopped protecting her from consequences. I told her that after the hospital, something in me changed. That I realized she'd been taking pieces of me for years because I let her. And the one time I didn't step in to fix things, the outcome felt unfair to her. She sat there quietly for a long time. Then she said, "So this is payback." I shook my head. I told her it wasn't payback, it was balance. I told her I didn't steal anything from her child. The inheritance still existed. It just wasn't what it could have been, just like the friendship, still there, just smaller, weaker, missing what it could have grown into. She cried then, not loudly, just tears sliding down her face. She said she felt like she'd lost everything. I told her she hadn't. She still had a healthy child, a family, a life. What she lost was the illusion that she could take without cost. We didn't end the conversation as friends, we didn't hug, we didn't promise to fix things, we ended it honestly. She said she needed time, I said I understood. When she left I felt lighter, not happy, but settled. Years have passed since then. I eventually had my own child. A different name. One I love just as much, maybe more, because it came from a place of healing instead of waiting. I heard through mutual connections that Claire tells the story differently now, that she says we grew apart, that life just happened. I don't correct her. Here's the thing people don't like to admit. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just stepping back and letting someone meet the version of the world they helped create. I didn't ruin her child's future. I just stopped sacrificing mine to keep her comfortable. The moral isn't about baby names or money. It's about boundaries. About what happens when you finally stop explaining why something hurt and start responding accordingly. Some people only understand loss when they feel it themselves. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's okay. It made me uncomfortable living it. But sometimes the lesson isn't about being kind at all costs. Sometimes it's about remembering that kindness without limits isn't kindness, it's permission. If you've ever been told to let something go when it mattered deeply to you, you're not wrong for remembering. And you're not wrong for choosing yourself when someone keeps choosing themselves over you. If this story stayed with you, take that as a sign. Some lines, once crossed, don't need arguments. They just need consequences. If this story hits close to home, you're not alone. Subscribe for more real stories about trust, boundaries, and the moments that change us quietly.